Going to fill in for Ben today at the table. If you would open to Hebrews chapter 5. As most of you know, we just returned from seeing our first grandchild be born, a joyous occasion. And one thing we've talked about a lot, thinking about that, is how wild it would be to see our kids as parents. You know, that's a new experience. We've seen them do a lot of things, but we've never seen them be a mom or dad. So it was really something to see Jack in that way, and he's doing great. He's super attentive to KK and everybody else, and trying to always be helpful. And as soon as the baby is born, he is just like fixated and fascinated and in love, and really devoted to both her and to the baby. And so there's the normal things that we kind of know to expect, but you don't really know till you've gone through it. And one of those is that right as soon as the baby's born, and then the days after that, the nurses come in. They got to do all kinds of stuff, check the baby out and do all these things. You remember they prick their heel, if you've seen all that, and they measure them and poke them and roll them around and do all these things. And so a lot of times the baby doesn't care for some of that, and a little bit of it's painful, especially the little heel prick, and they squeal and they don't like it. And so on one occasion when the nurse came in, she said, "I need to check him." This was before the discharge. And she just kind of unwrapped him, and I was watching, and Jack was watching her. And at some point, Haven started crying. He's fussing, and then he really started crying. And afterwards, Jack was talking about it, and he said that he felt this kind of like anger, like there was something very powerful in him. I think he probably never felt before, that as he heard this baby crying, it made him want to make that woman stop what she was doing. It's like that feeling of like, he's hurting, he's not liking that, you need to quit. And I can relate to that as a parent, that you get that protective kind of thing. Well, notice there's a reason, of course, I'm saying all this, but notice in Hebrews chapter 5, what we read in verse 7 about Jesus. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who is able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Jesus cried out and cried and wept and cried to his Father. And one thing that Jack doesn't know yet that he's going to experience if things go as they normally do, is that won't be the last time that his baby will be hurting, will be crying. He'll probably have a earache if he's like me and like half of my kids. Soon he'll have an earache and he'll just scream and cry, and there won't be anything Jack can do to make it better. And one day he might break his arm like Jack did, like Sam did. One day he may come home with a broken heart. One day he may come home and cry and wonder why some people don't like you. And it's, as a parent, it's helpless sometimes because you want to take that pain away. You want to help them if you can, but you can't always make it better. Think about what is happening, what's being described here. I think it's starting with the garden, where Jesus in the garden wept and was sweating so profusely. It was described as if he was bleeding and was crying out to his Father. And think about what he and his Father knew was coming. His closest friends abandoning him, betraying him, denying him, the other people beating him and spitting on him. And then, of course, the beatings, as we learned about this morning, starting with the scourging, the horrible pain that he was about to endure, leading all the way up to his death, which, of course, is something I can't relate to, losing a child. I can't imagine the feeling that you have if your kid is hurting and you would do anything you can to stop it. I can't imagine that if you can't stop it, and I just can't imagine that. And so not only did Jesus cry out in the garden in his tears with loud cries, and he's crying to his Father, and he's asking him if this could somehow go away. And then we know, of course, on the cross itself, he cried out with a loud voice as well. Now, one thing that's kind of different about this situation compared to Jack or me or any of you as parents is a lot of times we feel helpless because we would do anything we could if we could to stop whatever the pain is. If we had the ability, we would take it away, or we would step in and we would say, stop. Or, you'd go protect them from the bully, or you would help them somehow. But in this case, God could stop it. And so let's continue reading about what it says. It says, again, verse 7, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who is able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. God heard all that. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. So even though God heard him, he still had to go through with it. He had to obey because it was the Father's will that he would suffer. That's really hard. And we would think, well, if I would do anything I could to take away the pain or to stop that from happening, why would God allow his son, when he's crying to him and his tears are flowing and he's praying to his Father saying, if you can, take this from me? Why wouldn't a loving Father remove it from Jesus? Why would he allow him to go through it? Well, we know the answer. And if we keep reading, it says, in being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. It's hard to understand, maybe impossible anyway, but it's really hard to understand if you just focus on Jesus and his Father and you see a love there and you see a Father who could have stepped in but didn't. If you just focus on the two of them, that's really hard to understand as a father. But when you zoom out and you see the rest of the world, you understand the reason. That because this was the plan, because he endured that, because it was the will of the Father that he would be crushed and put to death, salvation was made available to the world. And so as we read in John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And what Jesus said is, before he died, eat this bread and drink this cup and do this in remembrance of me. So every week we come together to remember that sacrifice that was made for us, the love that the Father has for us, that he, at the cost of his Son going through that, he was willing for that to happen so that we could be saved and we could be reunited with him.